All right, we're going to get started, and before we start the workshop tonight, I just wanted to share some meeting logistics with you. The first hour and a half will be devoted to the counselors discussing the project, and we're starting up. We have a lot to cover this evening, so I wanted to give that first hour and a half for the council to hear some information and discuss the project with themselves. Any members who I'd ask that the members of the public try not to distract too much from that discussion in the first hour and a half. And any members who are causing a distraction will be warned. And if it occurs a second time, they'll be asked to leave. And when we finish with that first hour and a half portion of the workshop, we'll open up the meeting for public comment, which is important. And thank you all for coming tonight. The speakers will be given 3 minutes, and we'll have a timekeeper to display a yellow card when the speaker's reached 2.5 minutes and a red card at the 3-minute mark. We'll try to get through as many of the comments as we can, but I'd ask that you not repeat comments that you've already heard from others. This workshop will adjourn after an hour of public comments. Any additional meetings on the topic will contain a public comment session as well. And regarding the timeline, it'll be important that the council takes a final vote by the end of this fiscal year. This will allow the Public Works Department to prepare proposals for various funding opportunities that will be important to offset as much as possible of any burden to property taxpayers. And for logistical purposes, the council chambers have been reserved for May 15th, May 30th, June 6th, and June 20th. Important to note, though, at the end of tonight, the City Council will discuss what they want to do with the project going forward, whether they want another workshop or they want to just move it on to MSFI for their discussion and recommendation back to the full City Council. And so with that, I would recognize Don Lucier, our city engineer, and our consultants from Stantec.
Thank you, Your Honor. Don Lucier, city engineer. My presentation tonight, we've sort of broken.
We need your mics on.
Thank you. Don Lucier, city engineer. Presentation tonight's going to kind of be in 3 parts. The first part, we're going to be talking about infrastructure. Then we'll get into the financial piece of it a little bit, and then we'll spend a lot of time on traffic analysis. So my partner in crime here, Dave McNamara from Stantec, will be going through the infrastructure portion with you. So there's the agenda. Okay, as we get into this, last time we heard a number of questions about, how do we know what needs to be done? Why are we doing this, and why now? Those were sort of the key, big picture, overarching questions, I suppose. So I think I've mentioned to some of you before, but in infrastructure projects, there's usually one system that is the most dire need that drives us to look at the project and start planning a project out. For this project, it all started with drainage, and specifically the drain that runs from Court Street to Roxbury Street was identified as being pretty well undersized. Back in 2012, we did a drainage master plan. There was a question last time from one of the councilors, I forgot who asked, about, is there any way we can see what's underground before we dig it up and understand what's down there? So actually we have a couple of tools to do exactly that. The 2 photos on the right were from our, what we affectionately call the camera on a stick. It's a waterproof camera that we can lower down in the system, and it allows us to take pictures and zoom in on pipes from the access points, from the manholes and catch basins. So the 2 photos on the right are actually that 12-inch pipe that runs across Central Square. And you can probably tell from these photos that pipe is actually in very good condition. It's, I forget the exact age, I want to say 1931, and it's a 12-inch clay pipe. Unfortunately, it's very much undersized. Really, it needs to be a 24-inch pipe to carry the amount of storm water that we're asking for it. As a result of that undersized pipe, we see upstream the system can't accept the water, and we get street flooding during heavy rain. So Vernon Street, Court Street, that neighborhood we'll get these, you know, the streets will become flooded, and then after it stops raining, it goes down pretty quickly. It's because this pipe is undersized. Now, the photo on the left shows, I guess, oh, excuse me, I said right? Yeah, left and right. The two photos on the left are the nice pipe. The photo on the right is one that's in a little bit of a distressed situation. This is actually the same segment of pipe running across Court Street, but it's taken from the Roxbury Street end, looking up towards Court Street. And this is a typical failure mode for clay pipe. It's very rigid, so it doesn't flex. And when it's subjected to too much load, you get a crack along the top and along the sides, and the whole thing just squishes. And that's what's happened here. But you know, these three photos happen to be from the central square, but most of the pipes on Main Street are 8 to 12 inch, and most of them, all of them, are undersized. The good news is that the drainage pipes on the downstream end, Roxbury Street, Railroad Square, and Water Street, have all been increased over the years on previous projects. So they're ready to receive more flow. We just got to get it there. So, Dave?
Sure, thanks, Don. So I'll just touch on what you see here is the proposed drainage that's going back in. There is, you can see it's faint, but there is the red, kind of the crosshatch drainage that's coming out, the existing drainage that'll be abandoned. That'll be abandoned in place or removed if it's kind of within an excavation we're already doing. So in addition to the underground problems, there's also above-ground issues with ponding and puddling in areas where the drainage isn't even getting to some of the catch basins. So what this shows is kind of a whole-scale reconstruction of the drainage system. The exact locations of catch basins would have to be determined in the final design when curbing and kind of the street layout is better known. But this is basically the intent here. So you can see running mostly down the middle would be a larger trunk line. That will pick up the drainage from the catch basins on the edges. So this system would have, every catch basin would run directly to that trunk line, which is going to improve the water quality a little bit as well, because it won't have water flowing catch basin to catch basin, kind of stirring up the solids. The solids will be able to settle out in the catch basins, and the water will flow into that trunk line. That trunk line will then go to essentially the three different systems that Don just mentioned: water, railroad, and Roxbury. Those systems will stay together. The water will flow into those. Overall, it's about 4,500 feet of pipe. That pipe's going to be 12 to 36 inches in diameter, and we're probably looking at roughly 100 structures between basins and manholes to move that around.
Okay, so the next system is going to be sewer, and I'm going to talk extra fast because I've been given 10 minutes.
We got a quick question here
oh,
from
yeah.
Councilor Greenwald.
Yes. Slide. Where does this all exit?
The downstream end. So we're going to connect to the existing systems on Water Street, Railroad Square, and Roxbury. Those are the three big discharge points for the work.
Gilbo, not Emerald?
Emerald Street,
No, we don't get into
I don't think
Emerald.
there's anything that goes down Emerald Street.
Gilbo, I think, would stay on its own.
Yeah.
So any improvements on Gilbo would stay on Gilbo. Most of Main Street goes to Railroad. The southern end from kind of the Emerald-ish south goes to Water. And then really the central square area all gets to
goes to
Roxbury.
But eventually it goes to the Ashwheelock River.
Everything, those three systems, Roxbury, Water, and Railroad, all go to Beaver Brook, and then to the Ashwheelock River. Gilbo Ave currently drains towards the Ashwheelock, and you know that'll remain. Same with Lamson.
Tom's got a quick question too.
Yes, sir.
So for that, excuse me, for that reason, if you wanted to section this up and do different parts, you wouldn't have too many problems, because it's not going down Main Street.
Yeah, there's sort of logical phasing breakpoints that we've talked about, you know, and we've shown some phasing plans that sort of anticipated that. Unfortunately, you know, those logical breakpoints aren't the same for all of the different utility systems.
Right.
So in any case, when you're breaking it up and having, you know, some temporary work, there's going to be a little bit of that temporary configuration and rework the next spring, that sort of thing. But yeah, there are some logical breakpoints for
But the
phasing purposes.
stormwater is the one that's given us the most trouble in the past.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next system is sewage. And the four photos here are actually taken with the other system that we use for looking inside the pipes. This is actually a crawler. It's a camera mounted on a little tractor that can go about 800 feet up the pipes and take videos. It can zoom in, it can pan around. It's quite a lot of fun, actually. We refer to it as watching dirty movies. But this shows some of the sort of common defects that we see in the older sewer systems. These are all 6-inch clay sewer pipes on Main Street. The upper left-hand corner, you see what we call a sag. The pipe has settled over time, so it's no longer flowing. It doesn't flow downhill. Instead, that waste just sort of collects there until more comes in and pushes it out. Unfortunately, what that means is that the solids, the sediment sort of settles, and it becomes a problem. It requires more maintenance. The lower left is a root ball. So roots are attracted to the, let's call them nutrients, right, in the flow. They want to get in there and absorb that water and nutrition. In a newer pipe system that doesn't have leaky joints, it's got a watertight joint, there's no attractive, the roots don't know that there's nutrients there, so they can't get in and grow. With clay pipes, those joints tend to leak. They're not, watertight, so the roots get in, and that requires some maintenance. Upper right, you see cracked bell joint. Like I said before, these clay pipes, they last a long time, but they're very rigid. So any movement in the soil, any settlement, they tend to break at the joints. What that leads to is two things. You get soil infiltrating into the pipe. You also can get a lot of what we call I&I, infiltration into the system of groundwater. The two photos on the right, the lower one being an offset joint, they kind of demonstrate why we sell 2 million gallons of water every day, but we treat 3 million gallons of water, right? We're actually treating about 1 million gallons of water a day of groundwater that infiltrates into the system through broken joints and offset joints and that sort of thing. And Dave will describe the scope.
Sure. So this is the sewer. Again, you can see the dark color is the proposed sewer lines. One thing to note, on the southbound or the westerly side of Main Street, there's a big gap there where there is no sewer main. That is some larger pipe that was lined in about 2004, I think, so 15 or 20 years ago, running from about Davis up through Court. So we wouldn't be doing any work on that. That pipe's in good shape. It's a little bit bigger than the 6-inch that's on the northbound side. There are some services along there that weren't upgraded at the time, and they have the same susceptibilities that the main and those pictures show. So those would be replaced. And then really along the north side and a few of the side streets, that's where there's the smaller 6-inch clay is still in place. We'd upgrade that to an 8-inch and replace that all the way through there. So in total, I think we're looking at 3,000-ish feet of sewer pipe, 35 manholes. And about 20 to 25 services to be replaced as part of this work.
Now, unfortunately, I don't have any cool pictures of the water system. We don't have any equipment that can look inside the water pipes while they're still in service. They do have systems that can do it, but we don't have that. So instead, I brought some props. So this is actually a service valve that would have served somebody's house. This one was taken off of the Court Street service. But if you can use your imagination, you can kind of imagine that this is, instead of 1 inch, is 6 inches and much bigger. But that was too big for me to bring. So you can see in here, and I'll pass this around, the mineral deposits that have collected. And it restricts the flow, but the real issue is that if you needed to turn this valve off because there was a water main break or service interruption, this valve couldn't be relied on to shut that valve off. You wouldn't be able to stop the flow of water. And I'm sure you've all seen, pipes like this. I bring them whenever we have these sorts of events. This is a water main section that was cut out from a project. It looks kind of gross. In actuality, it's just mineral deposits that have come out of solution in the water, and they've attracted themselves and made deposits on the pipe itself. So it's safe to drink. It's a little off-putting to look at. The real issue is the loss of capacity. So for a 6-inch main, that's, this one's not too bad, but they can get pretty heavily tuberculated. And at that point, when you need that main for fire flows, it doesn't have enough capacity to move the water. One of the questions that has come up in some of these meetings is, well, why don't you just wait until there's a failure and there's a water main break and then fix it? And you can do that. That's what our crews do. They respond to those breaks. That mode of doing the work is what we call run to failure. I will tell you that in the long run, it is a much more expensive way to maintain the system. You're doing work unplanned. You're calling in people after hours. You're disrupting the businesses that rely on the water without any pre-planning. And at the end of the day, you're only fixing that 2 or 4 or 6 foot length of pipe. You're not actually fixing the problem. So that's my spiel about why we don't just wait for it to fail. That it's really better to do it in a planned and organized way. Oh, Dave, I forgot to let you talk.
Oh, not a problem. Sure.
This is a project that will replace all the fire hydrants and fire service.
Yes,
Yes.
I believe that's
Yep.
included, right?
Yeah, so what you're looking at here, again, the proposed water, at the south end, there has been some improvement to the water mains down at the south end up through kind of the Emerald area. So you don't see a lot of main work down there. There's some tie-overs to the side streets. And then the main work really going from there up through Central Square, full replacement of just about everything through there, services, fire services, some of the side street work as you see. Generally, the water main out here, I think, is the oldest of the utilities. These mains went in starting in the 1880s through the early 1900s is most of what's out there today. So it's basically the planned scope for the water work.
Now, another question that we've gotten is, what evidence do we have that this work needs to be done, and what's the history of problems? So I did get a few stats from the water sewer crew. The cast iron water mains on Main Street, most of them were installed between 1891 and 1904, so they're well over 100 years. The average service life for a pipe like this, we expect about 100, under best conditions, about 120 years before we start seeing problems. So they're all of that. In the last 3 years, we've responded to 4 water main breaks within the project limits. 2 were on Lamson. There was one at the intersection of Gilbo and St. James, and one at the intersection of Cypress and Main. So those were actual repairs. The other component of the project that we talked a little bit about is the valves themselves. There's a number of valves through this project area. When one of them doesn't work, the issue becomes that you have to go to the next valve downstream in order to isolate the break. And we saw that here with the Roxbury Street project a few years ago, where we're replacing valves in the Roxbury Street intersection. The valve that we had planned on using to isolate it couldn't get a shutdown. So as a result, in order to replace that, we had to go to the other end of that block at Church Street, and we ended up having to turn off water to the Fairfield Hotel for that day. That's the kind of disruptive thing that we're trying to avoid, where we're not able to plan for those sorts of things because we don't know what the failures are going to be. In terms of sewer breaks, I didn't write that down. There was, I believe, the stat that he gave me was about Lamson Street. The pipe on Lamson Street, because of the issues there, They've had to respond to numerous calls and complaints about backing up. They've actually cleaned that pipe 56 times in the last 5 years, that one pipe. So, you know, it's, the question we get is like, well, what happens if we don't do this, or what if we put it off? And I won't tell you that, you know, the pipe is gonna just collapse next year. But what we're gonna see is more and more frequent problems and maintenance needs. That creates cost for our staff, you know, the staff time to address it. It also creates a lot of disruptions for our customers. You know, just recently, Lindy's had a backup on a Saturday morning where they had to shut down because their sewer service was backed up. So those are the kinds of issues that we'll see and can expect more of if we're not able to take care of these problems now. So, the last slide here on infrastructure is just sort of a catch-all for the other stuff. Some things that we don't talk much about but are important parts of the project. The one all the way to the left shows the irrigation system that serves the landscaping downtown. That system is really kind of on its last leg. They've pieced it together. I have another photo that shows one section of the irrigation system with 4 actually separate repair clamps because it's failed 4 times within a few foot area. So that is part of the project. The upper, middle here shows what we call an electrical pedestal. These are located throughout the downtown. It allows us to provide utility power for events and that sort of thing. There's locks on the boxes, and we open them up for event sponsors. Those are in varying states and conditions, but they definitely need to be replaced. Lower middle, you see some sidewalk. Most of the sidewalk actually within the downtown is in pretty good shape, but there are some areas that are definitely need to be replaced. And with the utility work that we're doing, we expect all of the sidewalks to be replaced, even the ones that are unfortunately in good condition. The upper right is a utility, or excuse me, a light pole. These things have been in place since the 80s, and some of them are missing panels or have broken parts and whatnot. Then finally, the lower right is one of the little strip drains that are used to drain areas behind the landscaping beds. These are in fairly rough shape, and a lot of them are missing grates. We've had to kind of cob together some solutions to that. So those are all the sort of the ancillary things that are included in the project. Now, the other big question we get is how much is it going to cost? So this table, and I hope that you can read this. I know it's a lot of information to put on a slide, but it's a summary of what we're expecting the total project costs to be for the 3 sort of primary options that the council's been talking about. Option 1, what I've called optimize the existing. This would be largely leaving the existing streetscape features in place. No additional bike lanes. The roundabout here would be new signalized equipment, so a little more efficient, optimized, but still the rotary roadway around the square. And no improvement crossings or raised crosswalks or intersection at Gilbo. Under option 2 and option 4, both of those would have the treatments at Gilbo. Both of those would have the bike lanes and the expansion of the square towards the north. Option 2 would contemplate a 5-legged signalized intersection at the head of the square, where option 4 is the roundabout option that we've been discussing. With the construction total costs, including all of the utility work, the streetscape and other features that we sort of mentioned, those ancillary things, along with all the soft costs, final design costs, construction administration, things like testing materials during construction. Those are the range of costs between 14.1 and 14.9 million. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Court. Unless there's other questions from me before I go, I'm going to hand it over to Court.
Yeah, Chris.
Yes, all these prices,
Chris, I need you to turn on your mic.
Are all these prices in 2023 dollars or
Correct.
2025 dollars?
23.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I will hand it off to Court to talk about the funding aspects.
Hand it off to me. He's actually going to hand it off to me.
Oh, my apologies, Ben.
So on the first slide, we have a breakdown for you as to the funds that have already been appropriated for this project to date. So as of February 2023, in the general fund, you have appropriated just over 900,000. In the sewer fund, just over 300, and in the water fund, just over, well, about $450,000. So you have appropriated 1.6, almost $1.7 million to date. As you know, the downtown infrastructure project has been in the capital plan for many years, and the start of this project was in 2017. So we have appropriated some money, and we have been building a capital reserve account in anticipation of this project. Next slide. So this is an even more detailed breakdown of the funding sources, and if you go back and you look at your capital plan books, or if anyone from home wants to look at the books, they are available online in the finance department. It breaks down the project into different aspects. So there's some money from the general fund for traffic signals, and you can see in fiscal '24, we're planning $196,000, and then in fiscal '25, we're planning another $202,000, and then you'll see '25, '26, '27, how we break down what we were anticipating the future costs of the projects to be. And basically, what we do as part of the capital plan, we try to plan in advance for large projects like this so that we can spread the cost of the project out over multiple years. And so we were planning for in the capital plan, $8.195 million. And we now know, as of, and you got this number the same time I did, well, I guess I got it a day before you, but the updated number for the concept work now is $14.9 million. And so the gap in funding that has not been included in the capital plan with these updated numbers is just over $6.7 million. So I do want to also mention that the downtown project, one of the ways we've been setting aside money for the downtown project is in the capital reserve account. And a portion of that capital reserve account is funded by the downtown TIF district. About $250,000 is set aside each year in that capital reserve account through the TIF district. And just an explanation of a TIF district. Basically, when the city sets a district, sets a boundary in the downtown, any increased value in that district beyond the date that you initially set that value is used for the purposes of the downtown, in the downtown district. So there's a multiple purposes of that TIF district, and this is one of them, and we've been setting aside $250,000 in the capital reserve. So this slide, if you go to the next one, Court, thank you. So this slide is important because we've always anticipated the need for grant funding. We've always anticipated, once we had a more concrete design, going after some of the bigger grant funds like the RAISE grant, the Rebuilding America Infrastructure and Sustainability Equity Grant. And we've been anticipating going after northern borders. And so we have been applying for grants. On the top of this sheet, you'll see that we did receive one grant from the Clean Water Drinking Fund. It's a grant and loan forgiveness program. And so it's a $1.3 million program. So part of that is low-interest loan. Majority of it is a low-interest loan. And then a portion of it is the principal forgiveness. And every grant has a deadline when we must begin work. This one we must obligate by February of 2027. We did also apply for American Rescue funds for the stormwater, and we did receive $285,000 from the American Rescue Plan for this purpose. However, it is scheduled, it needs to be obligated by May of 2024. We do not think we're going to be able to execute by May of 2024, and so there's a potential we might lose that grant. But in the meantime, we've been applying for more grants. So just recently, the Public Works Director put in an application for Northern Borders for just over $2 million, and you can see the application deadline was due April 23rd, but we won't know until October 31st whether or not we were awarded. In addition to that, we have been going after the RAISE grant for a number of years for design of this project. We have not yet submitted a construction application for this project because we did not have enough details related to what the design actually would be. So we've only been seeking the preliminary design and the final design dollars. And so we did apply for the next step, which is the final design phase. We applied for $1.1 million. And so far, we have not been successful with this grant. This is a very competitive grant, but this is the grant that Concord was able to get, which funded a large portion of their downtown project. It was called the Tiger Grant back then, but it does take multiple years and a lot of effort and help from our congressional delegation in order to really be competitive in a grant like this. And so we do anticipate, once the council has made a decision on design, going after a construction grant. And I'd like to go after all of it, and so we'll have to wait and see how much we can get. But the goal is to go after grants to make up the gap and also to reduce overall costs of the project. So what does that mean in terms of grant requirements? You saw some of the grant deadlines. Those are the big ones that we're working with. When you apply for a grant, in order to be competitive, there are certain things that they're looking for. And this slide shows you the things that the RAISE grant is looking for. So for the big dollars, they are looking for grants that will improve safety, address environmental sustainability, improve quality of life, mobility and multimodal options, like the bike lanes, community connectivity, economic competitiveness, partnerships, impacts to underrepresented communities, adapt to changing climate conditions or severe weather events, and a benefit cost analysis, letters of support, and then project readiness. And project readiness is what we need for the council to make a decision on scope of the work in order for us to apply, and then really how many of these bullet points we can touch upon in our grant will really determine how competitive our grant application will be. And so if we put it back exactly the way it is, we're going to have some very creative grant writing to be competitive under some of these categories. They are really looking for improving the safety of either vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic. They are looking for making some sort of a change that improves the climate and climate changing conditions. And so, these are things that we'll need to keep in mind as we move forward in the project. So that's just a quick overview of sort of where we've been and how we've been budgeting for the project to date and the grants that we anticipate going after in the future.
Okay. Are you up next? Bring him. I can stay with you if you want.
Oh, you're gonna leave me alone? Okay. Thank you, Mayor, members of council, and manager. I'm Ed Robers. I'm with Stantec. You met my colleague Dave McNamara a little bit earlier. I'm also here with Bob Corning. He's our design team vision lead for the project, and then Liza Cohen, who's our mobility and parking lead. And both have done a lot of work on the project here. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about kind of the traffic effort that went through and how we use that to really inform some of the options that you've seen, the alternatives across all boards. It really all starts with this traffic component, and there's a lot of bits and pieces to it. This slide really outlines generally the project area or the corridor that we looked at. A lot of parts and pieces went with that, which was essentially the looking at the corridor as the corridor, making sure that we understand where traffic came and went and where it goes, and how it's influenced by all the bits and pieces of that. We call it friction, which would be either bicycles along the street, or pedestrians that are crossing, or even trucks and parking. All of that's built into the model. We looked at parking, did a pretty detailed parking analysis. We looked at crosswalks and all the safety components. I will say that a lot of these slides you've seen before. Really, most of these slides really came from, I would say, even starting back from the June 2022 meeting, the public workshop that we had. Also October, and then most recently in February of 2023. This just outlines that project area. We were specifically tasked in our scope to look at 4 intersections, and those intersections here are highlighted. And we wanted to understand what those existing conditions were, and essentially what improvements could be made, either on a large scale or on a smaller scale, that would improve either functionality, a level of service. We'll talk about that probably quite a bit during this conversation, how each one of those interact within the corridor. So those 4 intersections was obviously at the top of the square, or essentially really including all of Central Square. But that's the West Roxbury Court and Washington Street intersection. We looked at Gilboa and Railroad. We looked at Commercial and Cypress. And we looked at Emerald and Eagle. There's also an important part of the traffic study to look at safety. And part of that safety is to look at crash analysis and any of the crash information. We were able to work closely with Public Works and police on a 3-year crash data. I am pleased to say that while there's no intersections that are of a severe concern, there are quite a number of crashes that are shown here, and it's hard to discern actual locations. So when you see the Main Street column that has 177 crashes, or like a little over 64 crashes per year, that could be in a host of areas. It could be related to parking. It could be related to side street interactions. So I think the most important thing here is how that relates to injuries and how that relates to bike and ped crashes as well. So, injuries, 17 over 177 on Main Street, for example, that's under 10%. We would probably say that's a fairly decent number to have. Again, not rising to the level of severity, but certainly persistent enough that it would be a concern, and we should look at ways to prevent that. So this is just a summary, or all part of the information that we're putting together as part of the traffic study. These are graphics that we talked about in the past. The first sheet that you see here on the left side, Central Square, this is right outside the door here, and you really see how Central Square operates. Very, very wide, excessively wide pavement, but it's almost in a singular lane. Part of that creates a lot of confusion, and we would say that confusion tends to lead to either risk or mistake at times. Confusion also can lead to slower speeds, and there's a lot of stuff going on within Central Square, like parking, like wider crosswalks. All of those things we want to take into account in our in the traffic model that we built to lend itself to how do we predict what can happen and how can we make improvements. The graphic on the right is a segment of southbound Main Street. You got the 2 lanes right there. This was interesting because we just happened to take the picture of the electrical truck that just happens to be in a parking space that's overhanging quite a bit into that outside lane. It also is parked adjacent to a crosswalk, which we heard a lot from the public about this, what we call a double threat, which is basically when you have a mid-block crosswalk that has multiple lanes, in this case 2 lanes southbound. That double threat of somebody standing on the crosswalk on the right side or has visibility from a vehicle that might be in the car in the outside lane, but not necessarily visible to the car in the inside lane. And we see a lot of near misses here. Part of that strategy we looked at was to eliminate 2 lanes and go with a single lane southbound and northbound for that fact to eliminate that. Again, balancing out the corridor. We'll talk about that in a little while. But that has a way, a single lane operation obviously has a way to eliminate this threat, as well as some of the speeds that we heard a lot of folks talking about. This graphic on the left is really unique, and when we modeled the intersection, the main West and Roxbury intersection, and we see the existing queues, well, this doesn't really model well, because this existing condition is really what we believe is a partly a condition that's right out here on Central Square, which is the confusion of what lane should I be in, and as I approach going northerly. So this is, I took this photo on a Thursday afternoon, about 5:30 or so, and that's about a 900-foot queue in one single lane along Main Street. That happens quite a bit. And again, I think that a way to improve that would be to make sure that what's north of the intersection, where the signal is, has really clear guidelines or clear pavement markings or clear signage that the receiving vehicles know where they need to be. That's lending to the confusion, that's lending to the significant delays that we see here. The other photo is really a couple of pedestrians that we caught jogging across the intersection. And that's common along this. The intersection is very wide, it has very long crosswalks, short times, so all of that really, again, another spot of risk right here, and the need to do risky things. So all of these existing conditions wrap up together with the data set. This happens to be the traffic counts. We used a lot of sources on our traffic counts. We did actually physically count cars for several days. We counted cars, we counted pedestrians, we counted bicycles. We noted the number of trucks, we noted the interference of parking. We actually inputted all of the data from the traffic signal timing systems. And we used, as I said, a number of sources for the vehicles. And this is just a quick summary. We'll show it graphically in a second. But we also not only just raw counts, also turning movements to understand where all the vehicles are going. I know there's a lot of data on here. Really, several things that are really important that we'll talk about is in terms of levels of service of the intersections. That's really how does that intersection operate? And it's a balance of queuing length and the time delay, typically in seconds. And that's what you're starting to see right here. There's also what we call a 50th percentile queue and a 95th percentile queue. And that is just the length of queuing that would be expected in the existing condition, as well as what we predict in the model for the future. The 50th percentile is essentially the average. So this is the typical length of queue that you would see in normal operation. That 95th percentile is that really severe condition. 5% of the time, you're going to see the most amount of traffic, and that's what's portrayed in the documents. So to quickly start to document this, these are just turning movements of the entire project corridor area, which shows all the turning movements from Water Street in the south to essentially Central Square to the north. And these are in AM, midday, and PM peaks, just to understand what the peaks are on those two particular days. We did the same thing for pedestrians. These are all the pedestrians at the crosswalk locations within the corridor. So graphically, this is what it starts to really essentially look like. We know that the predominance of traffic is along Main Street. In this case, there's a little over 10,000 northbound daily and about 9,600 southbound daily. And then we could see the splits as it gets to Central Square, where just about 7,000 cars are heading northbound or northerly to and from Washington Street, and then a little over 8,000 cars along Court Street. The sidelines are represented here. We start to use this to start to predict where the traffic will be going and how the traffic will respond to any alternatives. We did the same thing on the pedestrian movements. Again, this is just as important. The model takes into account, the traffic model takes into account all those crossings and the delays related to that. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. And the traffic study report has a lot of tabular data like this. Again, we're gonna kind of portray it in a graphic form to make it a little bit more maybe interesting. But this is just looking at all of the subject intersections that we studied, and we'll talk about each of those approaches. So this is essentially what Central Square, the existing condition, looks like today. And the traffic movements that you see today are, basically, generally Roxbury, as you're heading westbound, is a right turn only into Central Square. There are 3 lanes from northbound Main Street entering the intersection. There's 2 lanes southbound on Main Street exiting the intersection. And you can see all of the other paths that are going there. We essentially, when we model this, we look at those 2 factors, as I mentioned before. We looked at the AM, or the morning peak hour traffic, and we look at the PM, or the afternoon peak hour. And typically, as you can see, the PM peak hour is typically larger. AM is in the pink color, PM is in the blue color, and you'll see that throughout. So these are just queue lengths and levels of services that you see for each of the approach legs.
I got a
Yes.
question.
Thank you, and just for my sake and really quickly, this is where you're talking about it doesn't model out quickly the fact that the left lane has 0 cars in it and the right lane has 900 feet. So it
Yeah.
looks like it's only a little bit longer, but in reality, that right lane takes 73% of the outbound traffic from when I did on the math on the last one, and the left lane takes 27.
Yeah,
So-
you just jumped ahead of me, but
All right,
you're
all right,
exactly
sorry.
right. This is where I said before about the model. The model works well, but, we wanted to make sure that we understood what was the field condition, and the field condition is really interesting. So you're right, exactly. That northbound Main Street model is saying that in that PM peak, if the 2 lanes are really functioning fully and well, then it should be about a 250-foot queue in the 95th percentile. Where it's really a 900-foot because it's got an extended condition because of the uniqueness of the geometry. That's an issue. So we see that. Obviously, the existing condition doesn't have any traffic on Washington Street. You'll see some of the alternatives as we come up. But that's a good point that you made. We have the theoretical model, and then we just take the reality test to make sure that we understand how it works. And I just want to note here as we get into some of these options, and this is option 1, you saw that before, the optimized lanes and a new modern traffic signal. It's important to note that there's 2 factors that kind of lead into optimizing what's out there today. And one of them is how we treat the pedestrian cycle. Today it's a push button and it's essentially an all-stop condition. All legs stop. And we call it an exclusive pedestrian cycle. And that takes a lot of time out of the system. In order to optimize it, we're suggesting that we would run a concurrent pedestrian cycle. Almost that the thought concept is walk on the green. And there's a number of ways that we can strategize how you do that. They have an operation called a leading pedestrian interval. And that interval will allow, when it goes to a stop condition, it'll allow before the light goes green for vehicles, it would start the pedestrian cycle, let the folks start walking so that vehicles can see that. Pedestrians have the right of way, not only here, but everywhere, and it would give them a chance to start right away. So we see really optimizing the signal operation with going with concurrent, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware of it. Also, in modernizing the traffic signals, we have a lot of outdated red and yellow time in the cycles today that probably haven't been modified for, a number of years. And also the crossing standards. Right now, the crossing, particularly that cross from, say, north or east to west on Main Street, that's 142 feet long. You can't make that in a single walk cycle. So usually you have people massed up in the center median. And that is, we're looking at ways to improve that by reducing that width and improving the time. So very similar, we looked at the same operations. And again, we've applied, I'm going to I'll yield to a question, yeah.
We just have another question. Gladys.
Thank you very much. I was looking still at the first one that you were just showing us, and I just wanted to mention the one I have a hard time with is when you're trying to turn to come into this building. I'm coming in off a court, you see there's a dotted line, and at the same time, cars are coming from Roxbury. And it's very confusing because I think, oh, good, I can go, I get clobbered. So that, I just wanted to say that I appreciate what you have down here because I understand that.
Yeah, no, there's some confusion in the existing condition today. And optimizing that, when you look at that, we try to, it's not only looking at the signal, but then the lane operations. Let's narrow some of these lanes. Let's make them really noticeable and signed well and pavement marked well, and make sure that the lanes are consolidated, so there's not too much choice. That's part of the confusion, so that would address your issue. I would agree. You know, and again, the same analysis where we're looking at levels of service. Levels of service are comparable, and I have a slide a little later that will show all of them next to each other. So as you're looking at this, and folks that will be able to look at this at home, you can kind of see each of the alternatives along the way. There were some impacts to this option from the existing condition. Mainly on some of the side streets. West Street got a little bit longer, Roxbury got a little bit longer. Main Street and Court Street, again, based on just optimized signal timing design, where the legs that have the most traffic are usually given more time to each of those legs. Some of the sidelines tend to suffer at times. And it's a balancing act when you try to affect improvements right there. Option 2 is to look at a new 5-leg approach. This is full movement traffic signal. Now it's including 2 directions on Main Street. That isn't there today. So that 5-leg now comes in West, Court, Washington, Roxbury, and then Main Street. In this case, this option looked at maintaining the 2-lane Main Street in both directions. We also did analysis for a single lane on Main Street going in both directions. I don't have that analysis up here. It did create some longer delays on some of the side streets that we thought would put the signal in failure. So we didn't pursue that any further, but certainly can share that. And part of that would be in our final report on the analysis. And we now see, again, generally maintaining that full traffic component. It allows us to clean up some of the crosswalk widths. It now has full movement feature at all legs, so the Roxbury movement, certainly Washington Street. And I will say that each of these options that we looked at as we presented have that leg at the top of Court Street blocked out. So there's no, that was the option that we looked at with the advisory committee that expanded the green area of Central Square. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is the modeling that we went through here. We looked at option 4 is a roundabout, and a roundabout that's located just at the south of Central Square. Again, looking at full movements. The roundabout, because of its deflection that's required for speed control and just processing vehicles, you can see that southbound Main Street is a single lane. Northbound Main Street is 2 lanes, very similar to what the signal is today, although there's actually 3 lanes out at Main Street today. But it would be 2 lanes to distribute traffic, for a soft left and a hard left, and then a soft right, a hard right, and a soft right if you're thinking about how you're going to get to Court Street and to Washington Street. And that modeling essentially looks like this. Again, from a levels of service, this obviously has the highest levels of service. We'll look at that in just a comparison in a second. But you can see how each of those legs, roundabouts, they're designed to process a lot of traffic. We've seen how this can process traffic quite effectively. These are just a couple of slides where, now you can really start to see the differences between the existing condition and whatever alternative. This is just the slide of existing versus optimized. You can see those levels of service for each approach. That's important, the queue length. So you're seeing levels of service, the delay in time in terms of how much time it is to delay through that cycle, and then the queue length at the 50th and the 95th percentile. All the data sets are essentially the same. We looked at a comparison of existing versus what was option 3, which is the option 2, which is the signalized 5-leg intersection. And then we looked at the comparison of the roundabout and the levels of service. This one, there's a lot, I know it's small, there's a lot of data sets in here, but you can now really see the comparisons from existing all the way through option optimized, option 5-leg signal, option roundabout. And that's essentially the levels of service. And as you can see, we're showing some fairly decent improvements. And there may be some on the 5-leg signal option, there may be some additional delays, but certainly the value of having full access, mobility on each of the legs adds itself. So I'll use Roxbury Street as an example. Roxbury Street's delay might have gone up a little bit, but that's also avoiding having to go fully around the circle as you do today to either go southbound or up to Court Street or down West Street. So you have that ability, your travel time would be greatly improved, even though you might have a little additional delay at that one signal cycle. That's the summary. I do want to bring up something that, oh, okay. Go back.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I want to go back to my issue that I'm talking about. As I look at each of these pictures, I'm still wondering if I take that turn, I haven't seen in any of these how we fixed it to be able to come Court Street, taking this inner circle, trying to get over here. And here's Roxbury Street, and which of these would fix that the best? I guess I'm asking.
Well, that's hard. I would say it's hard for me to describe what would fit the best for you, but I think from a
Well, or
mobility.
anybody in that situation.
I think from a mobility standpoint, if you're on Court, or if you're on Roxbury and you want to come here, I think that's what you said, you would be taking a right turn.
Right,
And you would have a direct shot in either of these solutions.
but if you're coming, I don't want to belabor it, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
But if you're coming Court, would we have to go all the way down to the next rotary to get back up?
No. So in the traffic signal, and I'll just back up to the signal. So if you came down Court, you would essentially be able to take a left at the signal and come and take another left up Washington Street as an operation of the traffic signal. It would be a 2-part or 2-stage left turn. That would be your movement. With the roundabout, you would then go around the roundabout to come up Washington Street. So you'd enter the roundabout, very similar at Winchester and Marlboro. You would take that piece to take your essential left. In this case, you'd be doing a U-turn of sorts. You'd use the full cycle of the roundabout.
I appreciate that, thank you. I've had people mention it to me too, it's not just me, but it's a real scary space. And if you're new drivers, which my grandson has been, it's just thank you.
It's a good point. So I just wanted to briefly bring this up, which was the conversation related to the top of the square. And what we showed here with at the 2 meetings, and particularly this past February, the conversation, and even your last meeting here with the council, the concern that was out here. So this was just the layout as it sat with a signalized option, as it sat with the roundabout option, again, that multi-use path and plaza space, and we were mitigating the replacement of the parking, and this was just an illustrative perspective rendering of that. We went back to look at, what would and could happen if we were to look at having a single lane putting that parking back and then widening. This case, we were showing a 24-foot wide sidewalk along the building edge to fix a number of conditions that are out there. And just from a perspective here, that's how that would look. You know, again, and very similar to the Gilbo Railroad and Main Street raised intersection path, this could be all one elevation so that in the case that you would have major events, you would be able to close that and have enough room in there. Really, the only difference here between the previous sketch was there are, you know, the additional bollards for the parking that would be along the sidewalk would be there where they weren't there before. So I did want to just outline that, and Bob is here to talk about, you know, any design details. Again, another factor that has benefit here is that there is still some additional open space that is gained. We were showing about 31,000 square foot green area for on the previous alternative. Here it's about 25, almost 26,000 square feet. So we just heard a lot of feedback on this, and I wanted to make sure that, you know, at least we tested it. There are a couple of questions that we would have with respect to traffic, that if this is something that the council or the committee group wanted to look at further, is just the direction and the impact that traffic entering this slip lane of vehicles that would be using this, how that would affect either Washington or Court Street. So we would. Yeah. Yeah, it has the parking back in, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was asking about the parking, and if this plan adds in the 16 spaces or whatever that would be lost with the other plan.
Those spaces would be replicated. They would be the same, essentially the same spaces that are there today.
So with this, no net change to parking in the downtown?
In a roundabout, with the roundabout, I would say we had the, and I do have a parking slide here that I could go to. But, you know, we were looking at a net go to it?
Oh, yeah, why don't you go back to the
Yeah.
first. I think one of the things that if you notice, we made up the parking spaces that were lost at the head of the square on the sides here. That was the original proposal, so from the head of the square, there was no net loss of parking in either option. In the second option, if you notice, we removed the parking along the side of the common and put it back at the top of the common. So there is no net loss in the central square area.
That's correct.
Okay. Council Remy.
Thank you. I think I was probably one of the folks that was pushing for this. The only thing I had been looking at this as reversing the direction of travel on that north side to prevent what you're talking about with folks coming in and out of that and the effect on the traffic on Court and Washington, and how they would functionally have to probably loop around through Vernon Street if they, or not Vernon, Mechanic Street, if they were to not be able to find what they needed. So unless you reverse the direction of traffic in there. But
And one of the things, as he mentioned, that we do need to look at is, if you can imagine in this option, a car or several cars waiting to see a spot there, and whether that backs traffic up into either the signalized or into the roundabout area. So that is one of the concerns that we'll need to take a look at to make sure that, again, that doesn't cause issues there.
Yeah.
Yep.
With the traffic signal analysis, is it considering very smart signals, meaning with trips and counters and optical or what have you to really fine tune it?
Yeah, we would, because it's, you really only have one signal along the quarter, coordination wouldn't work for any other, you know, tying it into other signals. But yeah, absolutely, video detection would be really important, and programmers, they essentially learn along the way, so they start to predict adaptive control. We would look at trying to modernize as best as possible to improve on the fly.
That slide that shows the two lanes, one lane is empty and the other lane is queued back up. I've never really seen that. I don't understand it. What?
I see it every day.
That does, I'm sure it must happen. Wow, what do people think?
It's, again, I think as Ed was talking about it, it really, I said, 3:30 in the afternoon, you can be there at 4:30, 5:30, et cetera. And it has to do with, I said, the traffic patterns. Folks who are planning on, for example, they know they're gonna wanna go up Court Street, so they wanna get in that lane closest to the eastbound to be able to go up and then head out Court Street. They don't want to get into that, they don't want to compete as both lanes there start going up. If you're going to go to Court Street, you have to cut back across. So it really is, again, it is a very interesting phenomena. And as I said, I've been observing it for a very long time, and I've always sort of, in my head over the years, tried to figure out how can we better utilize the two-lane cross-section up there. But that's the challenge. Part of it is just human beings and what they're comfortable in doing.
I don't know, I guess where I learned how to drive, if you see an empty lane, you take
use it.
But
Right.
then again, that's New York, so.
That explains it.
That explains it.
It's nice to know.
Thank you, Your Honor. To go along with Counselor Greenwald's statement, I agree. I live off of West Street, so if I'm coming home on Main Street, I'm often in that left lane. I will say, I think people, and I've seen this happen a number of times, they take the right lane only up to the light, and then as they're coming around the square, they merge because people in the left lane want to take that shortcut right by the flagpole, and when the light is green coming the other way,
Right.
you're just sitting there. I've sat through numerous green light cycles, but that's the way it should be. My understanding of the road is if you want to go west Washington or Court Street, you should be in that right lane on Main Street. And if you want to go all the way around to West Street, you should be in the left lane. And that way you just go around the rotary in your respective lanes. So honestly, I just think people just ignore that rule of traffic because they don't want to sit through a green light to catch a red. We need to fix that.
Yeah.
All right. Continue.
I will. We put together this parking slide a couple of meetings ago, and it just outlines essentially block by block section of where the total parking is. And really, this was a map that shows, again, a signalized intersection. The top of the square was obviously looking at the option of expanding, so the parking, the angle parking that's on the inside of both Court Street and Washington Street is shown here. This just lays out the corridor. The corridor as it sits in this option, this signalized option, I think was a net -1 space from the 167 spaces that are here today. And we know that there's other opportunities. We've talked about opportunities to expand parking on West Street. And there's options to do that. For example, if a roundabout is considered and we have a single lane approaching the intersection, that entrance to West Street with a roundabout, there's opportunity to add a lot of parking. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. A number of spaces along West Street where there isn't space to do that now. And also in the south end. There's a block just south of the Cumberland Farms block that we could. And again, we try to value, a parking space in the north of Main Street isn't the same as the south. But who's to say that the south won't expand and your downtown gets a little bit longer in the future? So there's opportunities there. This next one is really in the roundabout, so you can kind of see where most of that 15-space impact is really in the deflection into the roundabout at northbound on Main Street and then out of the roundabout going southbound on Main Street. That first block area, it would just be very difficult to have on-street parking in that area right there. So that's where, again, the number of spaces would be affected there. So that's really the summary that I wanted to present today, and we're here to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, discussion from the council? I saw Counselor Remy, then Counselor Johnson.
Thank you very much for pulling all that together. That was
Yeah,
really
wonderful.
great. And seeing, I know we've seen a lot of this before in different slides and different formats and everything online, but having it pulled to all of us so we can sit in one room and think through it is great. It is, my favorite slide out of the whole thing is probably the 4 side-by-side traffic pieces, and just being able to see that, because I know that's been a question a lot of us have had, is being able to see that comparison. And it's much more dramatic than I thought when I saw the difference in what a roundabout does versus what the rest of the setups do. And I really appreciate the fact that you pulled together the parking slide to show the parking added back on the top. I personally think I would prefer coming from the other direction to create ability to cycle through and back into the circle. But I think it's great to see what that would look like, and the visualization was great. So thank you.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go back to Counselor, your comments. I beg your pardon. I get so excited I lose track. Anyhow, if I'm coming up from on Main Street and I'm going to want to cut over and I want to go to West Street, by rights, okay, we should stay in that left lane. However, then I get up there around Court Street, then what happens? And that's my question, and that's a hard spot for a lot of people. No wonder we cut across. And anyhow, do you understand where I'm at?
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever you might say to that.
And that's what really lends to the confusion in the operation, is folks don't want to get trapped on the inside,
Right.
knowing that they have to get to the outside lane. That's the confusion, and that's where the risk is, so they stay in the right lane so that they can be positioned to the right side when they get, knowing that they're gonna loop around Court to get to West. That's part of it.
Yep.
So this is all very clearly laid out right now. There are signs right as you're coming, right by Prime Roast, that tell you which lane you should be in to go around the rotary. My point is, and this was mentioned numerous times throughout our presentations this year, that people will just do the right thing. If we have a roundabout, people will wait for fire trucks that are entering. My point is, people don't always just do the right thing. They don't follow the laws. They don't follow the rules of traffic.
And or if they've been drinking.
So I'm just really want to push that home, that we have very well lit signaled signs right there that tell you the flow of traffic, and people ignore them now. So we can talk about adding signs, we can talk about what people should be doing, but what people should be doing and what people do are 2 very different things. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yep.
Thank you for coming back. I agree that people don't always do what they're supposed to be doing. I think that that's going to be true no matter which scenario we go. So that's why I agree with your point, but not, I think it's going to be the same percentage of people doing it wrong either way. There's a lot of points of conflict in the current design. There's a lot of points of conflict in the signalized design. I like the roundabout because it solves most of them, but there's one that's really bad from what I can see in the roundabout design, which is coming off of West Street and trying to get onto Roxbury Street. That's the only one I can see that seems like it will be a challenge because of the 2 lanes coming across, and I'm curious for any feedback on either West or Court coming onto Roxbury Street. Seems like it will be a challenge from a flow perspective. Other than that, I mean, it solves almost all the points of conflict, which, to my point, it's much better than some of the stuff we have right now, but that's the only one that I'm curious if there's anything that can be done about, because it's 2 lanes coming through there.
I think one of the things to be thinking about is if you haven't experienced Key Road and Winchester Street yet.
Oh, yeah.
If you think about that, that's what we refer to as a modified, where you have the 2 lanes coming in and then the 1 lane's across top. So if you're going from Key Road over to the plaza, you're going across, you're using 1 lane to get across. So in many ways, the roundabout it does maybe look like it could be for conflicts, but it actually works even right now under construction, now that they have it curved out. So I encourage you sort of to kind of, for that experience of where you have heavy north-south traffic and then lighter east-west, that's sort of our Key Road, Winchester Street right now.
And you're making me realize this is also Lower Main Street. the lower Main Street intersection is the exact same as this, and I
It's
don't have
correct.
the
It is the
conflicts
lower,
that
the
I
main
think
Marble
of.
Winchester Street is also unmodified. It's a one lane across the top, bottom, the top and north and south ends, but it's 2 lanes going around back to again.
Yeah.
We have, they talk about the 10,000 cars today. That's what's going through down below. So again, we've been very, again, this community has become very comfortable in working with these modified styles of roundabouts.
Yeah. No, so I appreciate that. It made me think of the lower Main Street, which is the same.
So with the roundabout, it seems like it moves the cars most effectively, but is that always true? Is there like an upper limit to the efficiency of the roundabouts with a high level of traffic where it doesn't work as well?
I would say that it could. We're looking at what the predominant movement is here, and most of that is nearly through movement. There's not a lot of east-west interference that would create, either a large backup or conflict points in there, the flow. There's also enough gaps in the traffic lines that it allows the sidelines to go. Where we have 19,000 cars a day on Main Street that are turning into 7,000 and 8,000 plus on Washington and Court, I think it processes very well. We put a growth factor on here just to see if there could be an upper end. Within the planning horizon, we're still not seeing a lot of traffic growth, even growth before, like pre-COVID and post-COVID. In fact, we probably lost a little bit of traffic, in those years from, say, 15 to 18. So I think what we're looking at is that this is a high-capacity roundabout. It's configured a little bit differently geometrically, but it still processes vehicles. I'm not aware that there's any upper limitations unless there was a considerable growth factor that was placed on here.
We can certainly go back and, again, it's scary, believe it or not. The main Marble Winchester Street will be hitting in 2028, in 5 years, we'll be hitting the design year for traffic volume. And again, I think as it comes up, you look at the traffic counts there, they're very similar that are coming up north-south that passes through there. There's a certain amount that does drop. There's probably, there's close to over 13,000 plus coming up Main Street. You have a certain amount peeling off on Marlboro and Winchester Street. That's why you see that kind of drop down. But from a capacity standpoint, I guess I said it'll be interesting to see just sort of where that is, because again, we're going to be hitting that 20-year in 5 years. We're going to be hitting that 20-year period for that particular intersection.
All right. Yes, Tom?
In either design, either it's a roundabout or traffic lights, any consideration to pushing some traffic that wants to loop around looking for their parking space onto Vernon Street is not a good idea. It's just too much traffic as it is. And as you come out of Vernon onto Court Street, and I know what I'm gonna hear from the fellas down there, that it's gonna be engineered to spec, it doesn't work. So most people coming out, having to take a left-hand turn, there are cars parked in that section, you cannot see around it until the upcoming car and you meet in the middle of the intersection. We need to consider that yep, it's engineered, but it just doesn't plain work. The other part of that particular section of road, and it's probably not to the Stantec folks, but to whatever direction they've given, it doesn't show any improvements to that little bit of Court Street, and that needs some serious work as far as illumination and the sidewalk, and actually the layout of the parking spaces. Thanks.
Where are you talking about?
Between the top of the square and Vernon Street.
I got it.
We're all-
Yep.
Those are safety issues.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just north of our work.
Yeah, it's just north of the project.
Yeah, one of my biggest concerns has always been with this roundabout, and that has to do with the fire department. And I spent 6 years in the fire department, so I've come around those intersections on the truck, in reality, not just on paper. And one thing that you learn when you're coming, especially into traffic, on an engine with a loud horn and a siren, people freeze. supposed to pull to the right, they don't always. The thing that I always saw coming through is at least by the time we pulled out of Vernon, it hit Washington and came around the common backwards, by that time, the sirens, the lights that froze, by the time we hit it, traffic had cleared for the most part. I mean, you can come against the grain and get through clearly, loop without any major angles and head down Main Street. And like I said, by the time the truck hit it, traffic had pretty much cleared. With a roundabout, I don't see that. You're not going to have signalized lighting to stop the traffic. You probably hear the sirens coming, and at that point, you know, the argument is always just pull to the right. But you've got so many right-hand turns when you're coming around about where does that right stop? Where do you stop? When you're coming around when you're coming at Main, you're going around the roundabout and you hear the siren, do you stop there? Because that truck's going to have to come behind you and loop the other way around the roundabout. In my opinion, in my experience, as far as the firefighting part goes, I see failure written all over it. But that's one person's opinion.
All right, yep.
Thank you, Your Honor. Looking at the mini roundabout, I actually want to second Councilor Remy's opinions on adding that little road in with the extra parking there. I think that does resolve a couple of the issues potentially around being able to circle around. However, going back to the opinion I stated last time, I'm still not sure that it's quite better than what we might be able to do with the current configuration. And I believe another councilor, if I remember my notes correctly, had seconded the idea of exploring maybe taking the current configuration and just going with a roundabout in the current configuration with, you know, a couple maybe curb adjustments, and keeping the lights just for emergency vehicles and pedestrian crossings. And so I'm just curious if there's any opinions or thoughts around the feasibility of going with that large roundabout rather than the smaller one.
I mean, I guess I'll try when we've looked at it. Again, a roundabout is really in the deflections. If you look at this, you have those deflections. To create that in again, maintaining the same sort of cross sections, et cetera, that's there, you're not going to get the deflections that slow the traffic down. So that's always been the challenge, was can we convert basically Central Square to a roundabout? Because of this egg shape that was sort of created over time, that is very difficult without taking lanes out. So for example, if we were to take out the right turn on the Roxbury, then you can do it. But then you start running into some other challenge. So we've looked at it off and on over the years. Certainly putting in a light system to stop traffic, say for the emergency services, again, you can do that. You can do that on the roundabout. You just have to take a look to make sure that there's enough space from queuing lengths, et cetera, that again, a vehicle can certainly get through. Part of the reason certainly today is because coming into it, vehicles move into Central Square to get out of Washington Street. And that's why they go against if you think about, look at it, that's why they go against traffic coming northbound, because they don't have to make the right and go around that way. The vehicles just go through. So there would be, again, you could do it, but there would be, again, some interesting kind of additional movements that probably would have to be taken into account.
Sorry, thanks for calling me on again, Your Honor. I don't buy the fire truck piece just because we have so many roundabouts already that the fire trucks are able to maneuver through and people don't just freeze in the middle of them and block traffic. We're able to get there today. If anybody on Marlborough Street has a fire, there's a fire truck going around a roundabout today that has a single lane on the bottom that somebody could in theory freeze in, but we're able to get there. So I get the theory, I just don't buy that it really would happen that way. So maybe once in a while, but that's why they have the really loud sirens on the horn.
Anybody else? All right, well, thank you. I think that was very helpful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, with 5 minutes to spare, we're going to go into the public portion. And I would just remind the public again about the 3-minute time system that we have. And I will burn some time while the Carmike cards make their way up to me with silence.
using it. He was left, again, I read, I did do some research on that, and he left the effects on good terms down there, as far as they say, so, that, you're right, that there was that aspect, but they didn't want to, he left on good terms, and that's, I know, I understand. But, yeah, he's been so, yeah, so,
So we're going to get the public portion of this going, and I would just remind the public speakers about the 3-minute timing system that we have going on, and your yellow warning at 2.5 minutes, and then a red cue card at 3 minutes, and we will get going. So Lisa Peterson. Step up to either one of the microphones. You can sit down or stand, whatever you're comfortable with. And just state your name and address for the minute taker, please.
So Lisa Peterson with Service Credit Union.
Mike's
Can-
not working.
We can't hear you. It's green. Can you see?
Still a
hear
little
me?
closer, maybe. It's on.
Lisa Peterson, Service Credit Union, so on Winchester Street.
Let's try the stand-up mic.
Try this. Lisa Peterson? Okay.
Thank you.
Service Credit Unions on Winchester Street. So I don't know if my comments are appropriate for tonight, because I was more interested in the median that's going in. So if that's inappropriate, I can hold those to another time.
To the median that's going in?
Yeah.
On Main Street as part of this
on
project?
yeah,
Or you're
on-
talking
on
about on Winchester Street?
On Winchester Street.
So that's not really the
Yes.
focus of tonight.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I'm going to just pass on my comments, and I'll come to your next meeting.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Connie Joyce.
Thank you. Thank you all for a tremendous amount of work and time that's gone into this project so far. I don't know if I missed the bicycle survey count or not. I haven't heard how many bicycles. I've heard traffic, I've heard pedestrian, but I haven't heard bicycles. So, was there a survey?
Yes, and I think it was probably kind of glossed over in one of the slides. Maybe we can get that back up.
No, that's, I don't, that's all right. I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments
Sure.
from my thoughts this week. But I do think that both bikes and vehicles are at risk if we do move forward with a plan to go through town with bicycle paths. In the past 2 weeks, a world-famous bicyclist was killed in San Francisco. A driver did not see him. In St. Augustine, a Dartmouth coach lost his leg because he was not observant, and he caused the accident. Cities are now eliminating bike lanes because they realize they're a liability. Drivers are preoccupied, some taking medication that shorten their reactions. Some use other drugs or alcohol. Our population is aging, and a backup camera is a luxury. Like a GPS system, they're not always accurate. Cars kill and are considered by some law enforcement to be a dangerous weapon. Bikers, whether self, pedal, or e-bikes, need strict attention at all times. Last week on Washington Street, I was parallel parked, and a biker came down my lane as I was about to open my door and exit my car. Had I opened the door, I'm sure he would have been badly injured, and my life would have been upended. So the city, the same day I was up on West Street and I was crossing over into Roxbury Street, and there was a biker in front of me, and he was intending to go to Roxbury Street as well. But when he got there, he realized that Roxbury Street really is so narrow, even for two cars, that he couldn't even pass that street. He actually got off his bike and walked. I think there's supposed to be a 3-foot berth between bikes and cars. And bicycles used to follow the rules of the road, but they don't do that anymore. They don't go with the flow of the traffic like a motorcycle would. So I would like you to please create a safe bike lane that avoids downtown and keeps us all safer. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger Weinrich.
Great work, everybody. Part of my little hat, I've got a little case of shingles. That's all better, but I'm trying to hide the scariness of it. I wanted just to introduce everybody to Jeff Beck. And Jeff isn't here, but this is a book he wrote. And I read this book about 10 years ago and began to almost become a disciple of his, in part because when I travel around the country and I see the cities he's worked with, I'm kind of awestruck with what's going on. His singular focus is walkability. So what he does is he'll come to a city and do basically a walkable assessment for the town, come up with ideas, but the intention behind it is always financial and cultural, in that the most poignant and powerful method people are growing and developing and improving the quality of life in cities, financially as well, is by increasing walkability. This brings more people, more tourists, more development, more residents ultimately. So it's the single factor that is really driving cities. And the book is called Walkable City, How Downtown Can Save America One Step at a Time. And Jeff, I know in some of his talks I've listened to, he always starts with the question, do you want more tourism in your city? And that's a real question. Like, if we want it, great. If we don't, that's great too. But it's an issue because when you do walkability development, you draw more people to your town. As a business owner, I think that's good for business. I love when people come from out of town. I also know we do plenty, well with our local residents. So just a bunch of us in town, I don't know how many of us, some business owners who were seeing if we could bring Jeff to town for a one-day workshop in the next month or two. So, we'll keep people posted. I hope you guys can show up if you can make it. That'd be really great. I can't help but address the firefighting thing, Randy. I'm a former Cambridge, Mass. firefighter, and we never had an issue rolling apparatus through rotaries and roundabouts in Cambridge and Boston, and that was years ago. So I trust we'll figure out that if we have a roundabout. By the way, Jeff is not a proponent of roundabouts necessarily. He's a proponent of how do you make a downtown really vital and work and function. Anyway, good work. Keep it up. Thanks.
Thank you. Jim Sterling.
Hello? Okay, guess it's working. I'm Jim Sterling. I live on Jordan Road. Been a lifelong resident, 6 generations, both sides of my family. My wife also included, and 2 more generations. We will be officially locals. So anyway, I'm an advocate for bike lanes. And you might say, why is a chubby guy like me advocating bike lanes? It's like, how do you even get out of your own way? It's like, it's not just for me. It's for the future of Keene. Keene would be so much better with protected bike lanes downtown. We've spent all this money for our rail trails, all funneling into Keene. We're going to be adding another rail trail, in a year or so, funneling more people into Keene. And what do those people do? They come into Keene, they drive across Main Street, and they leave Keene. And honestly, one of the reasons, and I feel like a lot of the businesses really don't appreciate bikers, partly because they don't look at them as customers. They're more concerned about their parking. Parking, 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 parking. For the last 50 years, it's been harder and harder and harder to bike downtown, to the point where I won't bike downtown. I don't want to have anything to do with biking downtown. Okay? Sure, we go around. We go across. So they don't appreciate us as customers. If you have protected bike lanes, all of those people coming in on the rail trails, coming in from the north, coming in from different areas, will be able to go shopping. The building and the business owners, they just look at us as recreational pain in the necks. Just like, that we don't really, it's almost like, how do you become a second-class citizen in Keene? Ride a bike. That's what I see. I heard some comments from the last time. There were a couple of counselors that said, Keene is already a bikeable city. You know, it's bike-friendly. Are you kidding me? It's like, please ride down through Main Street and go around Central Square, go out West Street and do a few of those other places like Winchester Street. I'd rather ski Tuckerman's Ravine than do that. What I think some of the businesses are missing is the economic opportunity. They complain about parking, 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 and honestly, some of the ones that complain about parking, I'll put it politely, if you can't attract customers from more than a 2-block basis, then you might have a failed business model. And, you know, I'm not for supporting that at the expense of the 26,000, 28,000 people in Keene, half of which probably have bikes. And all we're looking for is 10 feet out of one of the widest main streets in America. We don't have a parking problem, we have a walking problem. There are plenty of businesses that I will walk from one end of the street, from Main Street to the other, in order to support. And then there are some, you could have a parking space right in front of them, and I'm not going to stop there. That's the way it's always been. It's not parking. But here's what I think the businesses are missing. Put in a half a dozen bike racks. With the growth of biking and e-bikes, you've got another 50 or 60 parking spaces. It's like, why don't you attract bikers? Every biker you attract doesn't take a parking space. I just think there's so many opportunities. I could go on for an hour, and thank you for the time. Thanks.
Thank you. Nancy Ankarski?
Hello, I'm Nancy Ancharsky. I live at 60 School Street. My comment tonight is about the multimodal options, which I know from grant writing, you really want to focus on something like that. But I understand that multimodal options can include buses, bus stops, not just bikes. I think it might be really creative to include something like small electric vans, small electric buses, bus stops in certain places. I agree with what Connie Joyce said about the bikes. I agree with some that Jim Sterling said about the bikes. I love to bike, and I bike downtown, and I park my bike, and I walk. And if you are on the east-west rail trail, you don't have to walk very far to get to most stores in Keene. I would ask that some bike racks be put in, and that is also another multimodal option. I also know that you have read some correspondence of mine, and I think these workshops were the answer to most of my questions. It's a really good thing that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. David Cam?
Good evening. I'm going to go quite fast because what I'm primarily interested in is not having our downtown changed to the sense of changing the roundabout that exists today. Additionally, I don't want it to stay the same, and there are many, many things that you can do to make it nicer. So I'm going to go through these things really quick and see if I can get through them. Okay, so number one is just the fact that I do not support the extension of the square. Leave the square the way it is. There will be some changes to it. Number two, the proposals that have been put out by Ed and his folks almost jump right from the way the square is today to new solutions that obviate the top of the square and fill it in. There's something in between which I have for you. So the proposed traffic circle current ways, and Ed did change some things, which is good. Single lane streets and their constraints opposed. So there's single lanes on both sides with the proposed solution. And what happens is traffic flow in single lanes, and there's parking both sides, will stop the backup when you're parking. And that may impact the whole circle. You'll notice in parts of that circle, there's only a single lane. And the parking spots are very close to your off-ramp. Usually in circles, there is more engineering done to make sure that people have a long way to get off the ramp before they back up. Here you can back up somebody right in front of, just turn around and go right up there and somebody's waiting for a parking spot, and two other cars back up, and now you got a single lane, you can start to back up that whole circle. So the circle's a good idea, but it's a really tight space for what we have. Parking is reduced. They've put another option in there that may bring some of the parking back. Delivery vehicles, where are they going to go? There's nowhere for delivery vehicles. All right, fire and emergency access, we've had a couple of firemen discuss that, but there is, for anything more than a 60-footer, it's really tight there, and the way they slanted away, those wheels are going to go around on that. Now, they may tell me I'm wrong. They engineer better than I do. That's fine. So then parking slots on the perimeters, we got around that. So those are negative things. So I want to go right to positive real quick. So a single summary of updates. Let's put in intelligent traffic signals. We talked about that, right? Let's take the turnaround at the top of Main Street. How much? 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Turn around at the top of Main Street and put it at Gilbo. We did a 7-day traffic survey also, and you will find that everybody that turned around at that top went south beyond Gilbo. Now, if you put it at Gilbo and make that a left turn into Gilbo and also a turnaround, then you get rid of a really large amount of traffic that is blocked or stopped at North Main, okay? So I'm not going to get done with all of these. I will tell you that if you can find this on my website, which is keensquare.org, and I put that up about a few months ago to discuss all of these things, and you can find it there, and please go there, and there's a place where you can give me the comments, and I'm open to everything that you can put in those comments, okay?
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Bonnie Chamberlain?
Hi. Bonnie Chamberlain, 11 Fox Ave, Keene. I drive down Main Street every day. I live on Fox Ave, so I go to Keene State College every day, plus errands. I've never had a problem with traffic. I do it all times a day. This is a city, and I still get to work in just a few minutes, or home, or if for lunch, all times of day. I don't see a real traffic issue. I think it would be really horrible to lose the flavor of Main Street, the 2 lanes. If we take away a lane for the new configuration and for a bike lane, it's going to back up traffic. It's going to make it more difficult, I think. And I think a bike lane is not right for this city on Main Street. You're talking 6 months a year. You're talking, if you go down to 1 lane and you have parking, and then you have a bike lane, more issues of accidents. Sorry. I was trying to make all my 6 months, bike lane. I'm for the infrastructure, the changing the pipes, I get that, they're getting old. You don't have to change Main Street, or you can do a little bit of upgrades, like the signals or something, but don't change what's not broken, because it's really not broken. Thanks.
Thank you. Pam? Slack.
Thank you, Mayor Hansel. I just have a couple comments here. This is a city council workshop, and I want to tell you what you told the public about this workshop. To provide counselors the opportunity to learn about and discuss project details as they prepare to vote on the design scope. And that's great. You've given a lot of great information out tonight. But the issue for me, and I'm extremely disappointed as a former city councilor, that there are 7 city councilors missing from this workshop. 7. 1 from Ward 1, 1 from Ward 2, 1 from Ward 3, 1 from Ward 5, and 3 at large. Unfortunately, 4 of those councilors represent me as a voter.
I would suggest, Pam, you reach out to them and let them give
I
an
suggest,
explanation.
George, because this was your decision to have this type of meeting, and the city manager, that if you really want the public to actually believe that you're concerned about the council voting on this project, it's not my job. This is what you presented to us. Those are my comments and what I've observed. I'm extremely disappointed as a former city councilor, personally. That's my first comment. My other comment is I know that we received some numbers tonight, which basically the amount of the project has doubled. Well, my understanding is that's from April 26th today, but it's not going to include the amount of the increase of the project if this doesn't start for 2 more years. That's a concern. Where's that money going to come from? Number 1, will it impact water and sewer prices? Number 2, so the price of the project to me is still a major concern. My other concern is, I heard this several times from a couple of councilors tonight, and you, Mayor Hansel, that there may not be no net loss to parking. Well, that's fine and dandy. But the issue to me is still concerned the impact that this project is going to have to the downtown businesses, and I will not stop there. My father, said this before, never drove a car. He always rode his bike. Always. His business was downtown. We have a lot of trails now here for bike riders. We've spent a lot of money. The city's received a lot of grants for that. I don't have a problem with bike riding. I do have a problem with them going downtown. And I think I will leave all my other comments. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so that concludes the public portion of the workshop, and we'll bring it back to the council deciding what they want to do. It feels like to me that the workshops were productive, but it feels like they've wound down a little bit, just my opinion, but what does the council want to do with this? Yeah, Randy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think at this point, it's ready to go to committee. I do appreciate the workshops. I think they went well. However, we had 2. First one had 100% participation of the council. This one barely 50%. The speaker was correct. If we expect the public to be engaged, and if we expect the public to think the city council is seriously engaged, we need to be here. I'm not making excuses or anything from anybody. I know we all have lives, but 50% on an important night like tonight, I think, what would it be, the next workshop? A third? I think it's ready to go to committee. And with that said, when it goes to committee, as you know, the public is still invited, and I know Chair Greenwald will make sure that the public all has a chance to speak. Any city councilor coming in that's not on the committee will have a fair chance to speak, but we can start moving forward now. And once again, whatever the committee votes on, it still comes back to full council. We all know that. This isn't something the committee votes on, but we need to start getting a grasp on this. And I think The workshops, like I said, went well, but I think tonight we started to float backwards a little bit because of a lack of attendance. So my 1/15th, or tonight, my 1/8 opinion is we move it forward to committee and start moving this project forward. And wherever the cards lie, that's where they lie.
Anyone want to argue with Randy on that?
That's a first.
Yep. Councilor Remy?
I actually don't want to argue. So it wasn't a good layup. But thank you, Your Honor. I think you're right. I think it's probably time for it to go to committee. From my perspective, I think that's fine. I'm curious the best way for us to provide our input to the committee, if it's not, because I don't know that I'll be able to make that particular night for MSFI. And as a counselor, I really don't like the idea of, if the committee comes up with a recommendation that's not in the interest of the full council, it'll be overridden functionally at the actual council meeting. And I don't like the idea of an amended motion at the council meeting. I'd rather see what comes out of MSFI be largely close to what the final piece is. So I just don't know how to best think about that, short of
It's hard to, I mean, I would caution the council from getting ahead of the MSFI committee. I mean, the MSFI committee's been here, they've listened to you all. I presume they're gonna do a great job, and we should let them do that work. Just my opinion, though. I saw Kat wanted to speak first. No? Oh, Chris? Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm glad we had these two workshops. We've got a lot of good information. The presentation today was extremely well versed, because one of the things that I would have, to me, the most important thing was not listening to the architects and the engineers, because they're doing it out of self-interest to make money. The thing was, what was it going to do for the city? And those were answered tonight. You gave me what it was going to cost. You gave me why it had to be done, why it should be done, what happens if we don't do it. The people in the last two presentations have put in a lot of stuff, and I'm thinking the best way it goes, follow proper protocol. It goes to the committee, and any counselor that feels that they have really important input to do, they either show up or they put it in written correspondence for the committee. The committee does its work, and it makes presentation to the full council. And 95% of the time, whatever comes to the full council out of the committee, we endorse it. But anybody who's been on the council for a while know there's some contentious things that the whole council is not going to agree with. And so let's do it the way it is right now, and let's get together, put all the information we got together, and come up with a decision. If the chairperson thinks we need more information, he's got the mayor and the city manager to go to. That's why he's the chair.
Okay, Mitch?
Thank you. If anyone thinks that this is going to make it in and out of one committee meeting, that truly would be magic. It won't be. But we do have to.
Can't hear you, Mitch.
Closer.
It's on, sorry. It's on, it's on, it's on.
Two needs to be green.
Green. No, I have a special one because I'm colorblind. The process will take more than one meeting, but we do have to start making some decisions and narrowing down these options. So we will gather information. I want to hear from all the counselors and as many members of the public that want to come out, so we can put together a request for the next meeting, so the consultant can bring us back some sketches, some drawings of the combination that we want to have for the city. I don't expect it's going to be a unanimous decision, but There is always the, when it comes to the council floor, if a councilor wants something specific, an amendment. And if it flies, fine. And I don't really expect that in committee, there's going to be 5 all in agreement even. But we have to start making some decisions to get this moving forward. The mayor said, or the manager said something about decision before the end of the fiscal year.
City manager?
Yeah, so originally, the timeline included a decision before the end of the fiscal year, or really before you go on break, which is in August.
Oh, I would think we could get it done by then.
Okay.
I just didn't know about the fiscal year part. Okay,
So that's your challenge.
fine.
Does someone want to make a motion to send it to committee?
Is that appropriate out of this workshop? Okay.
Does anyone want to make that motion?
There you go. I move we send the workshop information forward to the MSFI committee for discussion and a vote to the full council.
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Councilor Filio, seconded by Councilor Johnson. Any further discussion? Yes, Councilor Johnson?
I just want to say thank you for what we had tonight. For me, the pictorial, the whole process, Jill, thank you for setting these up. It helped me so much. I kind of know what's going on.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for a vote? All those in favor? Opposed? That is unanimous. I want to thank you all for coming for your time and attention tonight. This workshop is adjourned.
Well, I